The train hissed like a wounded animal as it slowed into Dovetail Station, coughing steam into the crisp frontier air. Kalea Whitmore stepped down with one gloved hand gripping the handle of her scuffed valise, the other clutching the frayed hem of hope. The wind caught her skirts, tugging at her like a child begging her not to go. Dust danced around her boots, and the scent of cattle and creosote filled her lungs. She blinked against the low sun, searching the crowd with a heart heavy from imagining too much. He stood apart from the others, broad, sunburned, with shoulders like hay bales and a belly that strained the buttons of his vest. His hat was clutched respectfully in calloused hands. Silas Dobbins, the man who'd written her poetry in crooked letters, who'd promised a quiet home and a loyal heart. He looked at her the way a man might gaze at the edge of a dream he's afraid to speak aloud. Kalea's breath hitched. He smiled gently. It wasn't a handsome smile, not like the ones in the pages of her worn novels, but it was warm, uncertain, human. And for one flickering second, she considered reaching for it. But something deeper reared up in her, the voice of every girl who'd ever whispered behind her back, every mother who'd warned her not to settle. The shape of his body didn't match the fantasies she dressed in lace and stored in the corners of her mind. She lowered her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, stepping back, her boots dragging against the dry platform wood. I can't. Silas didn't speak. He simply dipped his head and turned, walking slowly toward the dusty trail that led out of town. Each step away thudded against her chest like the echo of something she might regret forever. Back at the boarding house, Mrs. Callahan made no effort to whisper. He's a good man, that Silas Dobbins. Not his fault he's built like a barn. Some girls just think they're too fine for hard-earned comfort. Kalea sat on her narrow bed beneath the attic beams, hands trembling in her lap. Her valise hadn't even been unpacked. The room smelled of dried lavender and age. Outside, a rooster crowed into dusk. Inside her chest, shame began to bloom, slow and invasive. She hadn't meant to hurt him, but she had. That night, she lit the lamp and wrote a letter she'd never send. Dear Mr. Dobbins, I let fear speak for me today. Not the kind of fear that keeps a woman safe, but the kind that keeps her small. You deserved kindness. You offered it to me. I saw it in your eyes. And I turned away. Forgive me. I do not ask you to wait for me. But I needed you to know, it wasn't you. It was the story I told myself about who I thought I needed to be. She folded the paper and tucked it inside her prayer book. 3 days later, Temperance arrived, windswept, sun-bitten, and quiet as ever. She'd come on the same train, clutching the same valise, but with none of Kalea's illusions. You wrote me like the world was ending, Temperance said as she unpacked her few things into the shared room. But you're alive, and breathing, and still too proud to knock on his door. Kalea looked away, her voice a whisper. He deserved better. Then maybe let him decide that for himself. At dawn, without asking, Temperance took the letter Kalea had hidden. She pressed it to her chest, slipped it into her coat, and walked the 7 miles to the Dobbins ranch. The sky was heavy with clouds, and wind moved across the prairie like a breath before tears. When she arrived, Silas was fixing a broken fence post, his hands thick with splinters and soil. He looked up as she approached, eyes narrowing, not in suspicion, but recognition. I'm not Kalea, she said, straightening her shoulders. I figured, he replied. But I've read her heart. She put it on paper. And maybe she was a fool to turn away. But she isn't cruel. Silas didn't answer. He gestured to the porch. Coffee. They sat in silence, steam rising from tin cups, the breeze stirring his dog's fur as it lay between them. Temperance studied the man. He wasn't polished. But his silence didn't threaten, it steadied. He listened with his whole body like someone used to storms. Back in town, the rumors bloomed fast and mean. Mrs. Callahan told every ear that would listen. Can you believe it? First one sister turns him down, then the other goes running to his land like she's owed something. Folks from Georgia, no manners at all. Kalea felt the words crawl up her spine like frost. In the market, women smiled too sweetly. Men looked away or looked too long. She became a walking headline. But she stayed. She chopped apples for pies and scrubbed porches for the widow down the street. She taught a neighbor's child her letters and patched a stranger's coat for nothing more than thanks. Each small act, stitched together like a quilt of redemption. No one noticed how she stood straighter. No one heard the quiet grace that grew in her chest. One evening, she walked past the general store and saw Silas and Temperance in the distance, riding side by side. Not close, not touching, but in rhythm, like they understood each other's silence. Kalea froze, her fingers tightening around her basket. They looked at peace. A twist of emotion stirred in her belly. Not jealousy. Not quite. Something closer to longing. Something like loss. That night she couldn't sleep. She climbed to the attic window, pushed it open, and sat on the sill, staring at the stars. I wanted the story, she murmured. But I never asked myself what kind of story I'd be willing to write with someone real. The wind didn't answer, but it wrapped around her like a second chance not yet taken. In the darkness, she took out the old letter. Smoothed its creases. Read it aloud, voice breaking like kindling. Downstairs, a knock sounded at the door. She froze. Another knock, firmer this time. The sound of boots on wood. She rose, bare feet silent across the floor. When she opened it, no one stood there. Just a folded scrap of paper nailed gently to the frame. Kalea. The porch still has 2 chairs. If you ever want to sit a spell. Silas. Her breath caught in her throat, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Just a little. And then she stepped outside, into the cool breath of night, letter clutched to her chest, her heart moving forward like a girl relearning the weight of her own name. The porch was quiet when Kalea arrived at the Dobbins ranch, her boots coated in red dust and the letter still folded in her palm like a secret that had waited too long to be spoken. The house rose from the land like something carved, not built, its wooden beams weathered, windows aglow with lamplight that softened the dusk. Crickets sang in the brush, and the prairie wind whispered through the tall grass like breath over glass. She hesitated near the steps, her fingers brushing the rail. From inside came the clink of cutlery and the low murmur of voices. She almost turned back. But then the door creaked open, and there stood Temperance, sleeves rolled, an apron dusted with flour, and eyes full of quiet welcome. "I knew you'd come," she said, stepping aside. Kalea entered, the air warm with the smell of coffee and firewood. Silas stood near the stove, stirring something in a cast-iron pot, his broad back to her. When he turned, his expression didn't startle. No surprise. No reprimand. Just a pause, and then the softest nod, like a man who'd left the porch light on, just in case. "You hungry?" he asked. "I think I'm ready," she said, her voice catching. "For the truth, maybe." They ate without ceremony. The food was simple, beans, bread, and sweet corn, but it filled more than just their bellies. Conversation unfolded slowly, stitched together with silences that felt safe, not strained. Silas spoke of the land, of the bees he kept near the orchard, of how he once thought loneliness was just part of being a man. Kalea spoke little, but her eyes followed every word, drinking in the stillness between each sentence. After supper, Temperance quietly rose and kissed her sister's forehead. "I'll ride back tonight," she said. "This feels like your porch now." No one stopped her. Later, Silas brought 2 chairs out to the front, just as the stars began to flicker through the clouds. He handed Kalea a mug of coffee, his hand brushing hers. The contact startled her, not from fear but recognition. The softness of his grip. The warmth he carried like a hidden flame. "I thought you'd be angry," she said, wrapping both hands around the cup. "I was," he replied. "But not at you. At what this world does to people. How it makes women think they need to be small to be loved. Makes men think they've got to earn everything or lose it. She looked out at the land, at the endless dark pressing in. I was raised to believe love came in a certain shape. Tall, square-jawed, charming. Like the men in dime novels. I ain't never been in a novel, he said, smiling wryly. But I've loved someone before. Quietly. From a distance. Who? You, Kalea. Since the first letter. She didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, she listened to the wind, the rustle of leaves, the creak of wood beneath their boots. Her throat ached with something too old for words. Slowly, she reached for his hand, not to hold it, but to trace the scar across his knuckles. You work hard, she murmured. He nodded. You see it now? I see it, she whispered. And I'm sorry I looked away before. Rain began to fall, soft and sudden. Silas rose and pulled her gently toward the doorway, but Kalea stopped just beneath the porch overhang, her face lifted to the sky. I need to feel it, she said, letting the drops kiss her skin. All of it. The shame. The hope. The beginning. He joined her, standing close enough for warmth but not touching. What are you hoping for? He asked. That I didn't ruin something that could have been good. His eyes searched hers in the dim light, the rain catching on his lashes. You didn't ruin it. You just paused it. She smiled, small and sad, then brave. Do you remember what you wrote in your first letter? He thought for a moment, then chuckled. I believe I said I had a hound, a cow with a limp, and a front porch that creaked like an old hymn. And that you weren't much for poetry. I lied, he said, stepping closer. I write it in the dirt with every step I take. You just have to know how to read it. She reached up, fingers brushing his cheek, tracing the lines of wear and resilience etched into his face. I'm learning, she said. When their lips met, it was not a kiss of conquest or even confession. It was a kiss that trembled under the weight of everything left unsaid. It tasted of earth and rain and the long road back to self-worth. A kiss born of choosing, again and again, to stay. And when they parted, they didn't speak. They just sat again, two chairs under a quiet sky, hands brushing as the world breathed around them. In the days that followed, life unfolded not in grand declarations, but in acts of care. Kalea planted herbs near the port. Silas built her a shelf for her book. She began writing again, letters, stories, things she wasn't ready to share just yet. Town folk kept whispering, but her shoulders didn't bow under their gaze anymore. Shame, once sharp as a thorn, softened into something she carried without apology. At night, she and Silas walked the property. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. But always they moved together, like wind across wheat. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was earned. And then, one afternoon near autumn, a wagon arrived from Georgia, unexpected, dusty, creaking beneath the weight of travel. From it stepped a man Kalea had once known. Tall, square-jawed, dressed in finery that no longer impressed her. I came to find you, he said, hat in hand. Kalea stepped out onto the porch, Silas behind her. She said nothing. Not yet. But her heart, so recently healed, stirred again, not in fear, but in the deep certainty that love, when real, doesn't need to be declared to be known. And sometimes the past doesn't return to reclaim, but to prove just how far you've come.